You may have 100 pieces of paper in your pocket, but you sure don't have $100 in legal tender. That's the real issue here today. It's not just the count, it's the counting of legal votes. Illegal and counterfeit votes must be tossed out. That is a common sense rule that must be followed in Arizona, Georgia, and all other elections. Thankfully, my home state of Georgia has worked to fix the serious problems that plagued our state's election process, such as signature discrepancies on absentee ballots, off-hour ballot counting, and unsecured ballot drop boxes, just to name a few, so that voters can trust the process. I will do everything in my power to ensure that Washington keeps its hands off Georgia's election laws and that our state's 10th Amendment rights are not seized by the federal government. With that, I yield the remainder of my time to Mr. Biggs so he too can keep Washington and this committee out of the business of the people of Arizona.
Thanks. Thank the gentleman from Georgia. So this question for Vice Chairman Gates and Chairman Sellers. So either one of you can answer it. Don't need both, but just either one. So I'm trying to understand, because it gets on the thematic thing that we were talking about just a moment ago. I'm trying to understand how the auditors, whether they're the auditors you hired or the auditors that worked for the state Senate, how are they able to do any type of validation of the 2020 election results if the database was actually cleared before they got started?
And again, that's something that I would prefer if we can provide a follow-up answer to you on that. But again, this was all available, and I believe there may have been a public records request. I'm not sure if there was on that, but you know, we can.
But you had actually cleared the servers and you backed them up to the archive, you said. So just to change slightly, the auditors hired by y'all to do the audit, they were not FEC certified forensic auditors, right? They are certified to operate on these machines, and but not
voting. They're from voting system laboratories.
Right, so but they're not auditors. They're not certified auditors because the FEC doesn't actually certify any forensic auditors for elections. Is that correct?
They are people who understand how election machines work. They have significant experience.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a yes or no question because you and I can bounce around here. The FEC does not certify full forensic auditors at all.
I believe that. I believe that's. Oh, it's the EAC that certifies them.
They're not. They don't certify. EAC doesn't certify full forensic auditors.
Now, that term, that full forensic auditor, I'm not familiar. I don't think I've ever.
They don't do forensic auditors. They don't certify. What they certify deals with the machines themselves and tabulators and whether they can operate on those machines, right?
And whether they've been tampered with and connected to the internet.
And without objection, Mr. Stanton is authorized to participate in today's hearing. Mr. Stanton, you are now recognized.
Madam Chair, thank you for allowing me to participate in today's important hearing. I'm very disappointed that Mr. Logan declined to appear here today to address questions about how the Cyber Ninjas firm was selected to conduct a multi-million-dollar months-long partisan audit. I suspect the reason he isn't here is because he does not have good answers, that his involvement is one of the reasons the so-called audit was a fraud from the beginning. Mr. Logan has a history of spreading baseless conspiracy theories about the election. It may be one of the reasons why he was chosen to advance the false narrative by Mr. Trump's loyal followers in Arizona. I'd like to walk through a little of that history right now. On November 19th, 2020, Mr. Logan tweeted, quote, "Dominion servers in German were grabbed by the good guys in Germany," unquote. Dominion is a company that makes election servers. Mr. Logan was apparently referring to the theory spread by Gateway pundit as well as convicted felon and former Trump aide George Papadopoulos that the U.S. military seized Dominion servers in Europe following the election. Mr. Becker, were Dominion election servers seized by the U.S. military in Germany or anywhere in Europe after the election?
There's zero evidence to support any part of that allegation, including the idea that there were Dominion servers in Germany at any time.
Thank you. For the record, USA Today, the Associated Press, and Reuters all fact-checked this claim and rated it false. According to USA Today, quote, The U.S. Army denied performing such a raid, and the company whose purported servers were seized didn't even have servers in Germany, unquote. The week before January 6, Mr. Logan prepared a document for the recently sanctioned Trump lawyer, Sidney Powell, to help Republican senators who wanted to object to the certification of the election. This document's central claim was that Dominion's core software, quote, originates from intellectual property of Smartmatic, a company that was founded in communist Venezuela with links to Chavez, unquote. Mr. Becker, you are an expert in this field and have studied elections. Are you aware of any evidence to suggest that Dominion's core software originates from a company with ties to former Venezuelan dictator Hugo Chavez?
There's absolutely no connection between Dominion or any other software vendor in the United States and Hugo Chavez or the nation of Venezuela, to my knowledge, or to anybody's knowledge, for that fact.
And I want to point out for the record that even the Trump campaign knew this conspiracy was baseless. According to an internal memo prepared for the campaign in mid-November 2020, Trump campaign lawyers stated that Dominion has no direct ties to Venezuelans. More recently this summer, while the fraudulent audit in Arizona was taking place, Mr. Logan starred in a film called, quote, The Deep Rig, which sought to prove that the 2020 presidential election was rigged against Donald Trump. In the film, Mr. Logan states, without any supporting evidence, that the CIA or former members of the intelligence agency may be spreading disinformation around election fraud. Mr. Becker, is there any evidence supporting the theory that the CIA officers spread disinformation about election fraud, any at all?
There's zero evidence of that.
These conspiracy theories are all completely groundless, and yet Mr. Logan has publicly espoused them. If this was the person the Trump loyalists in Arizona Senate believed was the right person for the job, it's pretty clear that their goal was not to conduct an honest audit. If Mr. Logan were here today, we'd ask him whether he still believes these conspiracy theories. We'd also ask him how he could possibly conduct a fair and impartial audit when he's already made up his mind on the basis of debunked internet conspiracy theories nearly 8 months ago. We can't ask these questions because Mr. Logan unfortunately declined this committee's invitation to defend his work under oath. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. And before we close, I want to offer Mr. Biggs an opportunity to offer any closing remarks you may have. Mr. Biggs, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As an old trial lawyer, I just got to know how long you're going to give me. Oh, as long as I want. Okay. My flight doesn't leave for a couple hours. I can just go on. Anyway, thanks, Madam Chair. I appreciate it very much. I agree with so much of what colleagues on my side of the aisle have been saying today, that this is an unnecessary encroachment into Arizona's travails, if I can put it that way, over the audit and our election system. The Constitution leaves that to us. If there was some kind of something that was materially violative of civil rights, then maybe that would have warranted this. But I'm going to just go through a few things that I think are so important, not the least of which is the fact that in September of this year, excuse me, last year, September of last year, before the election took place, polling data showed that only 22% of Americans thought that the presidential election of 2020 would be free and fair. Only 22%. That was consistent with polling in 2012, 2008, 24, and the last time that my Democrat colleagues believed that they legitimately lost an election was 1988. That's what the polling indicated. What we've heard called the big lie over and over today by our friends from the left and the Democrats is something that they set the gold standard for in 2016 and for the last 4 years. The question of the audit, as I mentioned early on, was bizarre to me because my colleagues across the aisle want it both ways. So they repeatedly, as one of them said, it is shameful. It is shameful that we had this audit. They kept going on and on. The last gentleman just ripped Doug Logan. I don't know Mr. Logan. I don't know his history. They ripped that. They ripped the dark money, the funding sources they had problems with. They ripped everything they possibly could about the audit, and at the same time that they were attacking the audit, they simultaneously argued that it buttressed their position as to who won the election. I view that as specious, inconsistent, fallacious. I was asked who won in Arizona. I don't know, because there were statutory issues with this election. No election is ever perfect, but in my mind, we've not resolved the issues that took place at this time. I had more questions to ask. We don't have time to ask more questions. I'm going to go without asking those questions and maybe submit them in writing. Maybe we can get answers in writing. There is so much underlying this, and this notion that this was a fraudulent effort to get at the root of this election, I think that's abhorrent in of itself. We should have welcomed an audit. I regrettably have to say that, in my view, watching from outside, it certainly looked to me like the board was obfuscating and trying to prevent an audit. My recommendation early on was just do a full and complete audit. Get it over and done with. Resolve it. That's what I said in November. Resolve that issue. Put this thing to bed. And here we sit almost a full year later, and people still have questions about election integrity. I don't know how we're going to resolve that, but I do know that this continued antagonism towards this audit, while at the same time saying, well, it proves what we said, but it stinks, that's ludicrous. I would hope that we can have audits, meaningful audits. The audit that was conducted statutorily by Maricopa County, that was a statutory audit. But that really wasn't an audit. Nobody here would say, oh yeah, that's a full and complete audit. No, none of us would say that. It just isn't. It's meant to provide some kind of statistical reference point. And as Mr. Bennett, former Secretary of State of Arizona, pointed out, it simply was not even with a random sample. I had people who worked in polling locations who told me they came up and said they were concerned. I had people who worked on those boxes who said they were concerned. I think there's legitimate concerns. I'm not sure that the audit revealed those, but I can tell you what, both sides are further entrenched today than they were 6, 8, 10 months ago in Arizona. And that's a shame. That's a shame, and I don't know how we're going to resolve that. I'm going to yield 1 minute to Paul Gosar from Arizona.
Madam Chairwoman, I would like to just ask unanimous consent to submit several transcripts to the record of Democrats and Republican senators and many others raising the same concerns as myself and my constituents. I asked, and several articles for the record.
Without objection.
Last thing I want to make the aspect is to really hit home. Mr. Biggs made it very, very poignant. Is Code 52 U.S. 271 It was passed by a Democrat majority over 50 years ago. It supports audits. It encourages audits and their findings. There is plenty of unanswered questions here. I talked about it earlier. Trust is a series of promises kept. The way you keep trust with the American people, with Arizonans, is be transparent. That's all that's asked. And when you look back at my testimony on January 6th, that's what I asked for. I asked for a 10-day moratorium to let any state have 10 days to look at an audit, to do it right. Look at Kill Chain. Please take the time to watch Kill Chain. It's hardly a conservative group that points it out. But this isn't a Republican or a Democratic issue. This is an American issue, getting it right. That when I cast my ballot for whoever is there that I cast it for, it goes there appropriately. And electronics, hand manipulation doesn't skew that aspect. That's all we're asking. So from that standpoint, I love the conversation back and forth, but I don't think people are bad like we're intending. Even Mr. Raskin introduced legislation because he saw electronic manipulation and problems. And it goes both ways, whether it be 2016, 2018, 2020, there's plenty to go around. So why not get it right this time? Why not be transparent? That's how you gain trust of the American people. Trust is transparency. Madam Chairwoman, thank you for the indulgence. I appreciate it, and I yield back.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, I have some articles that I would submit
recognize
to
you
the record.
for the purpose of putting items in the record.
Thank you so much. One is a piece from February 26, 2021, Arizona Republic. Another one from Representative Shauna Bullock, dated February 2021, Washington Examiner. One from Glenn Greenwald, September 27th. A letter from Madam Chair to Honorable Trey Gowdy, dated April 5th, 2018. Another one from Representative Jerry Connolly, dated January 29th, 2018. And the last one from the Baltimore Sun, dated January 5th, 2017, entitled Rep. Jamie Raskin Not Seeing Electoral College Challenge for Trump.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Okay. We have been told that Mr. Keller has logged on. Mr. Keller is now recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Keller?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much to all our witnesses for taking time to testify before the committee today. Before addressing the subject of this hearing, I'd like to take a moment to urge the majority to use its oversight power to focus on any of the numerous crises facing our country, be it rampant inflation, the crisis on our southern border, the irresponsible way in which the Biden administration pulled out of Afghanistan, skyrocketing energy prices, or the staggering national debt, just to name a few. The price of natural gas alone is at a 10-year high. This must be addressed before winter sets in and Americans have to make difficult financial decisions just to heat their homes. The integrity of our elections is directly linked to the integrity of our democratic system of government at the local, state, or federal levels. While proper election protocol is essential, the matter of Arizona election audit is fundamentally a state issue. This is the second time in the course of a week that this committee has raised issues firmly in states' jurisdictions into the federal arena. Rather than attacking a private company for fulfilling its contract and conducting an election audit, this committee should be directing any objections about the audit to its originators, the Arizona State Senate. One thing that all voters, regardless of party affiliation, can agree upon is that we must have election integrity. That is the only way to ensure trust in our elections, faith that our elected officials have been righteously elected, and confidence in our government. I would just again encourage the majority party to take a look at the issues that lie squarely within the jurisdiction of the Oversight and Reform Committee. Believe me, there's plenty of federal agencies that need oversight and reform. We should be focused on those. And the states where they have issues should focus on making sure that they address those issues. We certainly aren't going to call in, the Arizona Department of Revenue and investigate how they handle their state income tax collections. If we have an issue at the federal level, we should be dealing with that. But issues that are within the state's jurisdictions, we should actually go back to those states and follow the Constitution and do exactly and have them address those issues. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back the balance of my time.
Oh, I'll take your time.
I yield to Mr. Biggs.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Keller. Appreciate that. So I'm going to be able to ask a couple of the questions that I didn't think I was going to be able to ask. So I was looking at your website called justthefacts.vote, and on myth number 4, I found that it said that the county does not change its election management system. That it's false that the county does not change its election management system passwords. I assume that what you're asserting then is that you regularly change the passwords for your EMS server, for the server for EMS.
Yeah, my understanding, I'm not sure what you mean by regularly, but it is something that is changed.
So would you then be surprised, I guess, that the records from Cipher clearly indicate that all accounts had the same password, and even the username was the same and has not been changed since the EMS server was set up?
Yeah, again, I don't have that in front of me, so I'm not sure what the basis of that is.
If that were true, that would be concerning about cybersecurity, would it not?
No, that would not be concerning about cybersecurity because, Congressman, I think as you understand, the EMS is not connected to, as you relates to cybersecurity, it's not connected to the internet in any way. It's an air-gap system. We did 2 audits that confirmed that these machines that were used in the 2020 general election were never connected to the internet.
And that's your assertion here today? Okay.
That is,
okay.
Yes.
All right.
Based upon certified folks that took a look at that as well.
And how is the paper? So let's talk about paper for a second. On myth 8, vote secure paper does not have a special coating to prevent bleed through. Are you saying that only vote secure paper was utilized in the 2020 general election?
Yes, vote secure paper was utilized, but it is a fact that you can have bleed-throughs, and that's why we made sure we redesigned the ballots so that if there was a race on one side of the piece of paper, it wouldn't bleed through and show up as a vote on the other side, on the election on the other side.
Okay. I hope to be able to ask Mr. Bennett about that. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. I'm now told that Mr. Fallon has logged in. And Mr. Fallon, do you wish to ask questions?
Yes, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
Okay, you are recognized.
Thank you. I dream of the day that we have hearings in this esteemed committee on the crisis, not really even a crisis, but the catastrophe on the border. Being from a border state, I believe now that this administration made all other 49 states border states as well. But Madam Chair, I'd like to yield the balance of my time to my colleague and friend from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
I thank the gentleman. Thanks, Mr. Fallon. So, Mr. Bennett, let's talk about the paper. You heard the testimony from Vice Chairman Gates. Can you please respond to us about the paper that you found in the audit, that the auditors found in the audit?
What I was informed of is that there appeared to be 10 different sources or types of paper used for the ballots. I personally witnessed the fact that on some ballots there was a fair amount of bleed through from one side to the other. But as Mr. Gates mentioned, one of the things that you're supposed to do in setting up your election in Arizona is align the ballots so that if there is bleed through from front to back or vice versa, that no corresponding ovals are affected. And it's my understanding that even though we found bleed through, we did not find that bleed through overlapping an oval on the other side.
So, to your knowledge, there was no encroachment from one side to the other?
That's my understanding.
Thank you. Can you add on here to the whether there was any issues with regard to the use of the same password and usernames in some of these servers?
I can simply repeat the testimony of Mr. Ben Cotton, the CEO of Cipher, the company that looked at the equipment, who said that Their evidence showed that that the county used common usernames and passwords, and that I think there was more than one, but as required by state law and election procedures manuals in Arizona, they did not use unique usernames and passwords, so that if there was a question related to who did what in the election management system, not a cybersecurity issue, as Mr. Gates mentioned, but the purpose for having unique usernames and passwords is so that if you have things happen within the election, you can tell who did it. And he said that the use of common usernames and passwords make that impossible to detect.
So you wouldn't know necessarily who was even logging in because the usernames are not discrete?
Correct.
Explain to us the election procedure manual and its relationship vis-a-vis statute.
The Election Procedures Manual is specifically authorized in state law. It is under the direction of the Secretary of State's office, which I occupied for 6 years. I did 3 of them during my 6 years. It's adopted in the off-election years, also has to have the consent of the Attorney General and the Governor to sign off on the Election Procedures Manual. It has the effect of law as is dictated in state statute itself.
So if there's an issue with compliance with the procedures manual, that is a statutory violation because
yes,
it's a law.
Yes, sir.
So my understanding is that the Senate President attempted to reach out and attempted to work with the county, but that for whatever reason an impasse was reached, and the subpoenas were issued, and the ultimate issue is compliance and whether there was contempt on the part of the board in responding to those subpoenas. Mr. Sellers?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I had met personally with the Senate President numerous times, telling her that if there were serious issues or questions that needed to be answered, I wanted to help get those answers. And she felt that, well, and I'll back up a little bit, because the 2 additional audits we did after the election was over were really done to answer questions that had been given to us by the Arizona Senate.
Thank you. I'll thank the gentlelady.
The gentleman yields back, and I now recognize myself. People are coming in and logging in at the end here. Our good friend, committee member Jackie Spear, is now recognized for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have been on for a good part. I'm also in the middle of an Intelligence Committee hearing, but I did want to get back on since there are still questions that need to be answered. Let me ask you, Mr. Bennett, you've been a public servant. Do you condemn political violence in this country, including attacks on elected officials and elected representatives?
Of course. I've had death threats myself.
Okay, so you know that Chairman Sellers and Supervisor Gates and their staff have received threats against their safety. The District of Columbia experienced political violence on numerous occasions in the weeks following the election. I was one of the members in the House gallery lying on the floor when the shots rang out, thinking that I was going to die that day. So making sure that we quell violence is critical. With that in mind, it's very important that we identify those organizations that have sought to further inflame tensions. One of those groups is Look Ahead America. On September 24th, this group held a rally in Arizona in which nearly half of the attendees were Proud Boys, which is an organization identified as a far-right neo-fascist group. Have you ever heard of the organization Look Ahead America? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
And you know this group has been associated with violent hard right activities for a long time.
I'm
Last
not
Feb-
aware of that, ma'am.
The group tweeted that it would participate in a conference hosted by Nick Fuentes, a well-known neo-Nazi. You are currently listed on Look Ahead America's, quote, leadership, unquote, page as its state chairman. According to the page, you are the 5th highest ranking individual in this organization. I'm kind of astonished that you would be associated with a group such as this, let alone take a leadership role. Your biography on the group's website notes that you served as, quote, Senate liaison for Maricopa County 2020 election audit. And Mr. Bennett, you said a few weeks ago that you are on a, quote, leave of absence from this organization to focus on election review. Is this true?
Yes, I was working on a voter registration project in Arizona known as AZ-51. AZ-51 connected with Look Ahead America, who wanted to help that process in Arizona, and AZ-51 decided to transition the voter registration project over to Look Ahead Arizona, which was formed by Look Ahead America. So I'm with Look Ahead Arizona, which is an affiliate of Look Ahead America. But I have been on leave of absence as I've been contributing my time to the audit without pay.
All right, so you've been trying to establish some independence, is that correct?
Independence from whom?
From the organization, since you're on a leave of absence.
I was already involved in the audit, Congresswoman, when the AZ-51 voter registration project transitioned to Look Ahead Arizona. So I'm not trying to establish independence. I already was involved in the audit when that transition occurred.
All right, but in a September 7th Arizona Republic article, you said, quote, I still consult with Matt on, who does he need to talk to around the state and help with efforts of Look Ahead Arizona and voter registration. Matt, I believe, is the executive director of Look Ahead America. It seems difficult that you could claim that you are on a leave of absence from the group, but are still consulting with it and actually recommending who the group's executive director should be meeting with. So I really am concerned that as an elected official, as someone who you admittedly say you have had death threats, to all of us and to the Arizona County supervisors who have experienced death threats, why an engagement with groups like the Proud Boys, who were part of this effort in Arizona prior to the election, would somehow not be recognized by you as antithetical to quelling violence and in effect encouraging it. And with that, Madam Chair, I will yield back.
Gentlelady yields back, and I believe that concludes all of the members that want to ask questions. I will now proceed with my closing remarks. I want to thank all of the witnesses today for helping our committee understand the facts about the so-called audit in Arizona, and all of my colleagues who participated. In particular, thank you to Mr. Sellers and to Mr. Gates and to the other elected officials who endured months of abuse, insults, and threats for simply doing your job. Thank you for having the courage to speak the truth today and to testify before the committee. The committee had also wanted to hear from cyber ninjas, but Doug Logan refused to appear today to testify under oath. That is probably because the facts about his audit they're so damning. This audit was designed to find fraud, but it didn't find any fraud. It was backed by millions of dollars, $6.7 million from partisan dark money groups, and it spent a year studying the election. But in the end, cyber ninjas came up with absolutely nothing. No fraud, no missing votes from Trump, no change in the election, outcome. So now, even after this huge audit, some of my colleagues are refusing to accept even their own biased audit, claiming that there is still uncertainty about the election in Arizona. Donald Trump is even claiming the audit showed he won. A nonpartisan fact checker rated that claim as absolutely false and gave him the designation of pants on fire, and I ask permission to put the statement and the article about it in the record. And so let's be clear, Donald Trump did not win in Arizona, and he did not win the election. He lost. And in the Cyber Ninja audit, he lost. But unless Trump and his admirers are willing to admit this truth and respect the will of the American voters, our democracy is at serious risk, as Mr. Sellers and Mr. Gates testified. The barrage of lies about the 2020 election has inflicted grave damage already. These lies are undermining public confidence in our elections. They are fostering efforts across the country to hold more partisan audits and pass anti-democratic laws to suppress votes and allow elected officials to overturn elections when their preferred candidates lose. Free and fair elections are the foundation of our democracy, whether you are a Republican or a Democrat. All of us should care about these threats to our elections. This committee will use every tool at its disposal to fight back against the lies and conspiracy theories that have been allowed to grow for too long in our country. I ask like-minded Americans, both Democrats and Republicans, to join us in this fight. We all have an obligation to stand up for the democratic values that we all hold so dear. With that, I, in closing, want to thank our panelists for their remarks. I commend my colleagues for their participation. And without objection, all members have 5 legislative days within which to submit materials and to submit additional written questions for the witnesses to the chair, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for their response. I ask our witnesses to please respond as promptly as you are able. This meeting is adjourned.